And therefore, what I'm saying is that these maqasid and values and universals reign over the particulars and govern our understanding over the particulars. And the particulars are not supposed to contradict with the universals. The famous definition of maqasid has something to do with 3 levels of needs. It's like, you know, the Maslow's need hierarchy of needs, or these hierarchies of needs in the books of psychology or management, organizational behavior, all of these. The scholars divided these needs in Islam into 3 levels: a level of necessity, and a level of need, and a level of luxuries. And this is a prioritization as well. Necessities first, and then what's called darurat, and then needs, what's called hajiyat, and then luxuries, what's called tahsiniyat or kamaliyat. And the necessities, or the darurat, are divided into a number of categories. First, the necessity of faith, or the protection of faith, hifz al-deen. And what they mean by faith here, the principle of faith. Not everything in the Islamic faith, not everything in the Islamic law. No, we're talking about the principle of faith. For Muslims, the principle of faith, for believers, is La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And the principle of faith for non-believers or non-Muslims is their freedom to practice their religion. So Islam is protecting both. It's protecting the La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah as for Muslims or for believers, and is protecting the freedom of non-Muslims to practice their religion. This is also an Islamic obligation, an Islamic necessity. So therefore, the preservation of religion is an objective, or preservation of faith, I would say, is an objective, whether for Muslims or non-Muslims. Then after that comes, and this is the first right, human right in Islam. The second human right in Islam is the preservation of life. Hifz al-nafs, literally the protection of souls, but it is best translated as preservation of life. Preservation of life, whether in the human form or any other form that is natural, which is connected to the human form anyway, is an objective in Islam. And in Islam, it is a major sin to kill anybody, to kill even any animal without a need, to kill a plant without a need. The Prophet ﷺ made the unrooting of a plant without a need something that is punished by hellfire, even, like with very strong terms. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And therefore, the preservation of life is an Islamic ethic. It's an Islamic objective and purpose and ethic too. It is something that we go by. There is no need in Islam to kill anything, even insects, unless there is a danger on human life or the other forms of life. But there is nothing in Islam that allows us to kill any living human being, or any living animal, or any living insect. And there are many, as we said, by induction. If you look at the Sharia by induction, there's so much in the Sharia that gives the value of life its place. And then after life comes the preservation of mind, or hifz al-aql, the protection of intellect. This is something in Islam that is also one of the pillars upon which Islam is built, by protecting the mind from intoxicants and so on. And the protection in Islam, as Imam Ghazali had written, it's a long story, but just to give some highlights, Imam Ghazali said that protection has a positive side and a negative side. The positive side is the development, and the negative side is the protection. So there is a negative side in the protection of mind, by the prohibition of intoxicants and alcohol, etc., and anything that goes against the sound mind and sobriety. And also in Islam, there is the development of mind by making it an obligation to seek knowledge, an obligation to travel to seek knowledge, and to spend from your wealth to seek knowledge, and an obligation to learn about whatever you are doing in order to perfect it, and so forth. Preservation of mind, as well as the preservation of honor, or hifz al-ard, preservation of dignity, if you wish. So after faith, the principle of faith, comes life, and after life comes intellect or mind, and after mind comes dignity, human dignity. And actually also this is a prioritization. If there is a problem of murder and a problem of drugs and a problem of abuse in a society, Islamically we have to start with the problem of murder before the problem of drugs, and the problem of drugs before the problem of insults and so on. Because insulting people and abuse, Allah forbid, and all of that, this has to do with dignity. But mind, the sobriety and the awakeness of mind is before the issue of dignity in Islam, and life is higher than mind. So this is a prioritization. We will talk in the second session, we'll talk about politics. This should be a prioritization for reform in a post-revolution context. You have to start with reform in the issue of people who were responsible for murder. You have to start by trying these people. Trials for murder has to be before the trials for corruption, because murder is more serious in Islam than corruption. And if you solve the murder problem and preserve people's lives, and then people's dignities, and then people's minds, then you can preserve people's wealth. And wealth comes after all of this. So after life, after faith and life, and mind or intellect, and dignity, and offspring, or things have to do with family. I like the translation of Hifz al-Nasl, or the protection of progeny. I like the translation in English to be the protection of family, or Hifz al-Usra, or Binay al-Usra. And that is a maqsid in Islam, that's a purpose in Islam in its own right. So in Islam, family, and then wealth. Wealth is not the most important thing in Islam, even though it happens to be the most important thing in the minds of many people. People worship wealth before even worshipping God, you know, the worshipping of the dollar, we call it in today's life. And no, in Islam, wealth comes after dignity. So I spend my money to protect my dignity. I spend my money to get an education, because my mind is more important than my money. I spend my money to build a family, because family is more important than money. I spend my money to preserve my faith, and to worship my Lord, because worshipping my Lord is more important than money. And this is actually a prioritization for personal lives, for policy in an organization, for politics of the country, for legislation in the parliament. This is the Islamic system of values that should govern everything that a Muslim community or a Muslim individual or a Muslim society does. And then after the necessities are a matter of life and death, darurat. Then comes what's called the hajiyat. Al-hajiyat are the needs. The needs in Islam, they say, for example, the need to trade, the need to, the mobility, for example, transportation, to go from one place to another. The scholars classified marriage as a need in Islam. And then they say that needs have to be allowed in Islam to each individual. But if there is a problem with a need on a very wide scale, then the need becomes a necessity. Al-hajatu idha ammat nazalat manzilatul darura. We say in the basic rules that if there is a need that's widespread, it becomes a necessity. So the need for trade, if it is widespread to the extent of inflation, then it becomes a necessity. An economic crisis becomes something that has to be dealt with as a darura, as a necessity. A need for marriage, if the lack of marriage, of means for marriage is becoming such widespread problem in the society, it becomes a necessity that the authorities have to intervene, the community has to intervene, and so forth. And then above that is the level of luxuries. And the Sharia of Islam, or the Islamic way of life, and I will explain that in the second session, is a way of life that does not only deal with our needs and our necessities that we cannot live without. It is a Sharia that also deals with our luxuries and our beautifications and our things from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, and out of His generosity, and out of His pure blessing to us, very incomplete and very poor human beings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we human beings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made part of His Sharia to have these beautifications and luxuries and additions to our life. And He made this part of Islam. Some other systems of faith make even some of the needs outside the realm of Islam. So some systems of faith, getting married is kind of a sin, for a priest or whatever. In some systems of faith, being rich is some sort of a sin, or eating something nice, or wearing something nice, or enjoying life is some sort of a sin. In Islam, luxuries is part of the Sharia. But in Islam, luxuries come after needs and after obligations and necessities. So we fulfill the necessities first, and if we have our lives preserved and our minds preserved and our families preserved and our wealth preserved, then we go to the needs. And we have the trade and the dealings between peoples and transportation and so on preserved, and then we go to the luxuries. So luxuries are part of Islam, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made part of His Sharia for people to enjoy their lives, but to enjoy their lives after they fulfill the necessities and the obligations in Islam. Because oftentimes we put the luxuries before the necessities. So we go to a disaster area for relief, and we put flowers everywhere, and we put lamps in the streets. But there is a murder problem, and there's a drug problem, and there's a poverty problem. But we insist on beautifying the streets. And when we talk about politics, we will see that this is not right in terms of policy, because in terms of policy, we have to start with the most important problem. We cannot go to a poor area where people have a hunger problem, and unfortunately we see this in the Arab world and many of the Muslim countries, and we see hunger problems. And we go there and we start to, clean the streets, or, put some nice banners and all of that, or distribute even Qur'ans to people. And that is not a priority. They don't know how to read and write, to read the Qur'an to start with. And their stomachs are empty, and they have a murder problem and a drug problem. And giving them copies of the Qur'an, nicely made and nicely put in leather bags, will not solve their problems, because this is luxuries. Yes, it is part of Islam, but we have to put the luxuries after the necessities and after the need. Also, one of the definitions of maqasid has to do with the maqasid of Rasul, the intents of the Prophet ﷺ. This is another classification of maqasid. The Prophet ﷺ, in his intents, sometimes he had a human intent from an action that is not part of the Sharia, and sometimes his action, or the default, in fact, that his action is part of the Sharia. So when we look at the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, we have to differentiate between the things in which his objective, his intent, his niyyah, his purpose was for being human. He liked certain types of food. He liked, zucchini and watermelon. He loved to eat, the shoulder of the lamb. These things are not Sharia. He wore, a thobe that is white and amama, and so did Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl. Everybody. This is nothing Islamic about that. It is just the way Arabs used to wear and used to eat and used to live, and has nothing to do with Islam. So we have to also understand the maqasid of the Prophet ﷺ, and we'll talk about that in detail in the second session regarding Sharia and politics kind of thing, because this is important to understand what we should take from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, from the tradition of the Prophet, what we should take and use in our life, and what we should consider only in terms of the meanings behind them, and not the shapes and forms that they take. Also part of the definitions of maqasid is what's called maqasid al-aqa'id, the purposes behind the articles of faith. The articles of faith in Islam, believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His oneness, and the angels, and the prophets, and the books, and the hereafter, believing that Allah is the provider, Allah is justice, Allah is the one who gives victory, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the strong, the almighty. Believing in all of this has maqasid, has purposes. So when I believe in the hereafter, the purpose of this in my life is to behave knowing that I will be asked in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are things that will have to affect and influence our behavior when we believe in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He is the provider, and He is the one who gives and takes, this means that when I pursue my life, I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who gives and takes. And therefore I rely on Him more. I have more peace of mind and peace of heart when I rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He is the one who gives and takes, not humans. And therefore I deal with humans as means to my providence, not as people who are providing me life or providing me whatever. Allah is the one who gives and takes. So Maqasid al-Aqa'id, the purposes of the articles of faith, have something to do with my belief and my behavior with people. So I behave knowing that Allah is justice, and I behave knowing that Allah is the provider, and Allah is the Almighty. Nobody else, I'm not scared of anybody, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who has all the forces, and is the one who benefits and harms. Al-Dar al-Nafi' subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the one who harms, and He is the one who benefits. So knowing this only means peace of mind for me, because nobody could harm me except with Allah's will, and nobody could benefit me except with Allah's will. Knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has everything written in a record. ما أصاب مصيبة في الأرض ولا في أنفسكم إلا في كتاب من قبل أن نبرأها إن ذلك على الله يسير لكي لا تأسوا على ما فاتكم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that whatever calamity that befalls you is recorded with us in a clear record, so that you are not agonizing over what you miss or being so proud of what you gain. So these aqa'id, these articles of faith, when I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has everything according to a record, according to a destiny, then whatever I miss in life, I don't agonize too much about it, and whatever I gain in life, I don't be too proud of it, and I give the credit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in whatever I have, and I rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in whatever difficulties I face, and so forth. This kind of, if you wish, Sufi kind of approach to Islam is also studied under the ilm, or the knowledge, rational knowledge of Maqasid Ash-Shari, under what's called Maqasid al-Aqa'id, the purposes of the articles of faith. It's also one of the categorizations of Maqasid. It is very important, finally, when we approach Maqasid Ash-Shari, to know how important this is in order to put the big picture of Islam in its place as the big picture that reigns over the particulars, and not to focus on a very small part of the big picture of Islam, or the very small part of the mountain, and forget the whole mountain. Maqasid Ash-Shariah, as I said, is Islam 101. I suggest my brothers to put this video under Introduction to Islam, not under advanced topics for researchers or whatever, because Introduction to Islam has to be through the Islamic principles and the Islamic ethics and the Islamic values. And that is how we can practice Islam in economics, in politics, as we will talk in the second section, in arts, in education, in whatever you would like to practice Islam in. It is very important to understand the maqasid before you approach these applications of Islam in today's context and in the contemporary context. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgiveness.